God, you're destroying my life. And Dilbert, being the rational and non-emotional engineer that he is, says, no, I'm only building the app. It's the app that's going to destroy your life. Don't blame me. She recovers and realizes that Dilbert's probably an interesting and educated guy. So she goes, it got a little awkward, but I'm attracted to men that are very intelligent. Why don't we go out this weekend? And Dilbert, being unusually harsh, says, I don't think that's a very good idea. I cannot get past your dead-end career. And the problem is, for so many people, they are part of organizations that are unable to respond to the massive amount of disruption that is occurring around the world. So for those of you who are out there thinking about, do I go back for a master's degree or an MBA? This is very, very critical for you to understand, right? You are at this stage of your career operating in a period of completely unprecedented change. And this change will be something I will describe for you, but your ability to understand how market dynamics are shifting and the kinds of organizations that are likely to benefit from that massive shift will lead to a completely different career for you, a far more fulfilling and satisfying and professionally and financially rewarding career. So the message is, you're either in a company that is disrupting the market, or the alternative, and a whole lot less fun, is your company is being disrupted. Now, the word disruption, again, we're seeing it in comic strips like Dilbert, is very overused. And the question is, what in fact is a disruptive innovation? So in very simple terms, on the left, right, the word innovation, of course, very commonly used. Anytime we do the same things in a better way, anytime we do an improvement, we are innovating. But however, there are very few innovations that obsolete the old and have us do things in an entirely new way. So as an example, in the very late 1990s, there was this company called Blockbuster. Blockbuster was the absolute dominant force in the world of movie video rental. Blockbuster used an old model, which was a brick and mortar model. They had very punitive late charges for people that didn't bring their videos back within a 24 to 48 hour window. They had a very limited selection, very limited inventory. The in-store experience was very poor because typically everyone wound up going there on Friday and Saturday nights, and there were very long lines and there were very few cash registers. And the consumption of movies was not all that enjoyable, which is not the way it's supposed to be. Netflix came along and decided that it would be so much more convenient. The user experience would be so superior if they could allow people to choose whatever movie they wanted from a very, very large catalog of offerings, allow those movies to be delivered to their home, allow people to keep those movies as long as they wanted, and ship them back with no shipping fee, completely changed the consumption of movie experience. And as a result, Blockbuster, with 97% market share and 5,000 brick and mortar stores in the United States alone, was decimated. They were disrupted because Netflix changed and continues to change the movie consumption experience. Now, let me show you an analogy. The great Muhammad Ali passed away recently, considered by many to be, one of the most popular athletes in history. Muhammad Ali won the gold medal in the 1960 Olympics as a heavyweight fighter. Now, the business models of a heavyweight fighter in Ali's era was where you literally would just stand your ground and slug it out with your opponent. In this very iconic photo of Ali winning the championship for the first time over Sonny Liston, brought a new business model to the world of boxing. Ali's business model was embodied in this very famous mantra, I float like a butterfly, I sting like a bee. Ali brought agility and speed and mobility to his sport, and he completely changed the way that people looked at professional heavyweight boxing. The analogy holds. Think of Blockbuster as Sonny Liston, the guy laying on the carpet while the young, brash upstart is glowering over him, and he forever changed the sport. So I do a lot of consulting to a lot of Global 500 company executive teams, and one of the questions that is often asked is, are you prepared for disruption? And unfortunately, most of these executive teams have a very false sense of confidence and security, okay? They would take great lesson from reading this history book by the British historian Paul Kennedy, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. Now, while this book is about the rise and fall of empires like the Greek and the Roman empires, the same exact dynamic is playing out in the world's largest companies. And this may be a fact that truly surprises most of you. It used to be that if your company was competent enough to get to scale, where you became a Fortune 500 company or a Global 500 company, you had achieved some sense of immortality. You had achieved some level of permanence in the business landscape. But what is remarkable is that since the year 2000, only 16 years ago, over half of these massive employers have gone away. They have disappeared. And it's only getting more difficult. So Thomas Van Cook, who is managing director of one of the largest private equity firms in Europe, says that even in more established industries, you're going to see a lot of changes in behavior really quickly. And if you're on the wrong side of that, it's going to get really ugly really fast. And of course it has. So on the left-hand side is a 4-box matrix that was popularized by the Boston Consulting Group. Boston Consulting Group, along with McKinsey, a firm where I worked for several years, and Bain, are considered the big three of strategy consulting. And the assumption that was implicit in this 4-box matrix is that once you got to scale, you could continue to throw off cash for years without really having to reinvest in the business, right? And as Paul Valéry, the great French thinker, said so aptly, the trouble with our times is the future is not what it used to be. That BCG matrix today, the growth share matrix, is a very quaint notion of the way things used to be, but it's absolutely not the way things are today. And so the problem is we have a lot of companies that do not have the courage or the foresight to be market leaders. And most companies today that are following the leaders are suffering from a wide variety of gaps that prevent them from succeeding and which lead them to be on that list of the Fortune 500 companies that are disappearing the way the dinosaurs did. What are some of these gaps? Most of them don't understand the notion that software is eating the world. We now live in a world where everybody understands what an application is because we live in them up to 4 hours a day on our iPhones and Android phones. But software and the automation and the algorithms and increasingly the artificial intelligence that is being built into everyday devices is forever changing the way that market leadership is defined. And as one small example of that, we have the Tesla. Now, you might argue that a Tesla is an automobile, and I might argue that you're incorrect, that a Tesla is really nothing more than a computer with wheels. The Tesla has an extraordinarily complex set of software that allows them to control the car. And as one simple example of just how sophisticated the Tesla is, you've seen so many product recalls, right? The most famous product recall recently is the Samsung Galaxy Note recall, where we've seen batteries exploding on airplanes. And Samsung just announced yesterday they're going to stop production of the Galaxy 7 flagship phone, a huge, huge failure and a $3 billion loss for Samsung at a time when they can't afford it. So when Tesla had a problem with its automobile, because the ground clearance was such that they were hitting speed bumps and they were hitting devices on the road, and it turned out that it was, a problem and their cars were starting on fire, they did not have to recall their vehicles to some central dealership. One, because Tesla doesn't have a central dealership model. They sell direct through retail stores. All Tesla had to do was send out a software update to raise the car by 2 inches. And in literally one click, the software was able to completely change the ground clearance of every Tesla that was out on the road anywhere in the world. Problem solved. So software is eating the world. General Motors and Ford and BMW and Toyota would have loved to have had the ability to do this with all of the recalls they've all gone through. That's cost each of them billions of dollars. The second thing that's happening is that more and more innovation is coming from outside of your industry. Companies are getting blindsided. 1 minute they're extremely confident in their prospects, and the next minute someone comes from a completely new domain and just takes them out. So let me give you an example. The French company Michelin. Michelin, of course, is most famous for its very, very high quality tires. One of the challenges that Michelin is and will face increasingly in the next few years is the commercialization of drone technology. Drones are following Moore's law, which says that every 18 months, their power and their speed and their cargo carrying capacity are doubling, while at the same time, their cost is falling in half. And as a result of that, there will come a point where drones will do the majority of the cargo carrying in the world, right? We're seeing many pilots run all around the world as we speak, and the first commercial drone operations are already up and running. The question for Michelin is, what will they do when they lose the market for tires, because the market for tires has collapsed to a small fraction of what keeps the lights on every day at Michelin? This is another example, as is Tesla. Think about what's happening in the auto industry. All of the auto industry players now are making pilgrimages to Silicon Valley to partner with companies like Cruise Automation that I'll talk about, to partner with companies like Uber, or going to Israel to partner with technology companies like Mobileye, because the auto industry is being transformed like never before. Okay? Another area where companies are really struggling is in their ability to understand you, the folks out in the audience today, to understand the digitally native millennial generation, okay, where everything has changed in the way that you want to be communicated with and the way that you want to be interacted with. Very few companies get it the way that Coho, a Canadian bank, gets it. Coho understands that millennials want to do everything out of their mobile phones. They care far more about the user experience than they do about, the back office of the bank. And so what Coho has basically said is, we're going to make a world-class user experience, assuming you never come into the bank. And we're going to have some black box on the back of this app, and we're going to, protect your savings, and we're going to pay you interest, and we're going to do all the things that another bank does. But at the end of the day, all we want to really do is manage a favorable user experience for our millennial customers, because they demand it from us. And we're seeing this across the board. In America, the company Whole Foods has set up a completely new chain called 365, which caters to millennials. The Marriott, because of the incredible challenges that the hotel industry is now facing by the success of Airbnb, is setting up a wide range of millennial-focused hotels. Everything is changing to address the millennials for those companies that get how different it is, okay? And of course, technology itself, the number of information empires that have collapsed, most notably, the most recent one, BlackBerry, the company that literally defined the smartphone market. I had my first BlackBerry in 1998. And the problem with BlackBerry is they never truly understood that they weren't creating an experience, they were creating a device. And so BlackBerry finally announced, finally faced up to reality a couple of weeks ago, they're going to get out of the phone manufacturing business, which is an absolute admission of complete and utter failure. So what's happening, though, of course, is it's getting faster and faster. And if you look at the way that business has evolved, we've had 4 epochs. Between 1900 and 1960, that 60-year period, we lived in the age of manufacturing, where the best companies in the world were world-class manufacturers. It could have been Sony in Japan. It could have been Ericsson or Philips in Europe. It was GE and Procter & Gamble in the United States. That lasted for 60 years. Starting in 1960, we had the age of distribution, where logistics and supply chain were key. And we had the era of UPS and CSX and Purelator and Walmart. But recognize that that epoch lasted only half as long, about 30 years. Okay? And then we entered into the age of information, which was spawned by the invention of the personal computer, both the Apple computer as well as the IBM PC and all the clones around it. And so this age of information was even shorter. It only lasted for 20 years. And now we have entered into the age of the empowered customer. And therefore, everything changes, because up until this point in time, it was all about the corporation controlling everything. But in the age of the empowered customer, with the introduction of the interactive web and social media, the customers are now firmly in control. Most companies simply can't handle that, okay? And of course, now we're looking at the empowered customer, whether it be through Facebook or whether it be through increasingly Amazon or Google, right? These are the companies that are allowing the voice of the customer and the needs of the customer to become predominant. So as a result of this new shift, we're seeing a free fall. And the number of companies that are failing or falling off of the Fortune 1000 is increasing dramatically. So in that 10-year window between 73 and 83, 35% of the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies fell off the list. In the decade between 2003 and 2013, that number doubled. So there are very clear data sets that show that it's getting harder and harder for companies that achieve scale to maintain scale, okay? The companies that do, and Netflix is a great example, Amazon is a great example, Nike is a great example, they embrace the Silicon Valley mindset. They may not necessarily be in the valley, but they operate with the principles exactly as if they were living in the valley in terms of what guides their business. Now, let's talk about how profound this is. Most of you probably know the name Kobe Bryant. Many people would argue that he is, along with Michael Jordan and LeBron James, one of the 3 greatest to ever play the game of basketball. Bryant had a remarkable career with the Los Angeles Lakers. He spent over half of his life. He was one of the first players to come right out of high school. He just retired, and he's become a venture capitalist. Lady Gaga's manager has basically stopped managing musical acts and has become a venture capitalist. Although some of you know Ashton Kutcher as an actor, Ashton Kutcher is increasingly a sophisticated technology investor, right? What's happening here is this massive entrepreneurial renaissance. There's this increasing number of very aggressive, very innovative companies that are entering the market from all around the world. There's an increasing number of entrepreneurial ventures being funded in China. Of course, in Europe, London and Berlin, as well as Stockholm and Copenhagen, are very sophisticated centers. We're seeing tremendous amounts of investment in places like Singapore, for example, and in India, okay, and in Australia. So we're seeing Silicon Valley mindset everywhere, and the number of new companies coming into the market is staggering, okay? So the question is, what does it take for an organization to have innovation in its bones, right? And as you study companies, you'll see that, not surprisingly, a very small percentage, roughly 5%, are what we would call the torchbearers, the companies like Netflix that continue to reinvent themselves. Think about Netflix for a second. When they started, they had a very simple business model. They put plastic discs into envelopes and mailed them to people's homes. But Netflix continues to innovate in order to stay relevant. And today they are competing with some of the biggest Hollywood studios and creating Emmy and Academy Award winning content because they have to. Because the demand for content became so high and it became prohibitive for them to license it. So they have had, over the last 20 years, the need to continue to raise their skills, improve their game. And obviously today they are being distributed in every country around the world except for China, okay? So what is it that these torchbearers understand? They understand that it is not the biggest. We saw what happened to BlackBerry. We saw what happened to Blockbuster. We saw what happened to Nokia. We see what's happening to Sony. It's not about size and scale anymore. Hewlett-Packard, the company that I started my career with in Silicon Valley, back when Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard were still running the company, has split itself into 4 pieces in order to be more agile. It's also not the most intelligent. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 PhDs on your staff. It's the ones that are able to change. And in the words of the great Jack Welch, considered widely to be the greatest public company CEO of all time, because of what he was able to do in terms of shareholder wealth creation with GE, change before you have to. Very few companies have the courage to obsolete their own products. And so there's a revolution being fought. This was a photo I took in Trafalgar Square in London in June of 2 years ago, where the taxi industry, the very sophisticated London taxi industry, decided that they were going to step out into the streets and strike for an entire day. And these coordinated strikes happened in London, in Lisbon. They happened in Milan and Munich. They happened in Bonn and Barcelona, and they happened in Prague, and of course in Paris. And of course, the French have a very different notion of what a strike looks like compared to the British. But this revolution is being waged against old, dying industries. And the old, dying industries are fighting for their lives, okay? So enter Travis Kalanick, the unbelievably brash, arrogant, ambitious, and aggressive CEO of Uber. One of the things, you can love Uber or hate Uber, and Uber has an extremely aggressive culture. But Uber understands that one of the areas most ripe for disruption is the first one on the left, complex experiences. Just like Netflix understood that and allowed them to dominate, just like Apple understood that and continues to understand that. I travel 200 days a year. Not only am I a professor at Hult, I'm chief marketing and strategy officer of an advanced technology startup with development operations in Tel Aviv, Israel, and our headquarters in San Francisco. And I spend a lot of time between those 2 locations. Kalanick, and I will tell you that when I traveled, the very worst part of the travel experience was always the taxi ride for so many reasons. Kalanick understands that the passenger wants to be the boss, right? The millennial passenger wants control. They want to have the taxi or the car show up at the location they want exactly when they want it. And that has completely revolutionized the way that we think of transportation. Today, Uber is the most highly valued startup in history and has a market valuation of almost 70 billion USD. They are operating significantly around the world, okay? One of the things that's happening in the world is this notion of a side hustle. Side hustle being a very Silicon Valley term. Most millennials don't only have their day job, but they're working on some side projects. And recently in the United States, we're seeing Uber actually advertise on TV saying, we're the perfect partner for your side hustle, right? When I get picked up in Silicon Valley by an Uber driver today, they're not people that used to drive a traditional taxi. They're the founders of startups that are driving for Uber between 10 at night and 2 in the morning in order to be able to put cash in their company bank account to fund their dream and pay their software developers. It's a completely different world that we're living in. It's changed everything, okay? Of course, Uber is eventually going to eliminate the need for drivers entirely. They're running a driverless car pilot today in the city of Pittsburgh, the home of Carnegie Mellon University, one of the top robotics research programs in the world, okay? And they're doing this in partnership with Ford and with Volvo today, okay? Uber has also launched Uber Eats. They're now operating in 22 countries. They recently entered Amsterdam, Tokyo, Johannesburg, and Dubai, and they're going to soon be in Brussels, Stockholm, Hong Kong, Taipei, and Jakarta, okay? And one of the things that's important to understand is, yes, there are companies like Takeaway.com in Holland, and there's companies like Just Eats in Britain. These companies are going to struggle to raise capital to allow them to compete at global scale. And so this is another example of Uber leveraging the infrastructure it's already created to start to do meal delivery. And they're making some very remarkable promises. We're bringing you the newest way to enjoy the best dishes in New York, a city that has horrific traffic, in 10 minutes or less. You can imagine the amount of big data behind the company that would allow them to make such a promise, okay? The sharing economy, of course, came into being because of the advent of the iPhone and GPS and the interactive web and social media. There's a massive number of new companies that have formed. One simple example is the company called Ship. Ship is a company founded by a Canadian. It started here in the US in San Francisco, and it's very representative of the kinds of companies that are changing the world today. Ship has literally said that the experience of having to wait in line at a postal office or having to package up your stuff and ship it back through a courier, whether it be Federal Express or Pure Later Courier, is just too much of a hassle. They come, they pick it up, they package it, and they find the lowest alternative and they ship it on your behalf, okay? And here's a very interesting example. Amazon, truly one of the great torchbearers of our time, a $100 billion company growing rapidly under the extraordinary leadership of their CEO, Jeff Bezos, relentlessly focused on improving the customer experience. Amazon Fresh is one of many initiatives that they've launched recently. They incubated this in the United States for many years until they got it right. And then they went into the UK. I was teaching a course on disruptive innovation in London in June, just as Amazon was bringing the Amazon Fresh concept to Britain. And this is an example of market followers. If you look at the list of the leading grocers in Britain, okay, they had literally 10 years to prepare for Amazon's arrival. It was clear they were coming. It just was a matter of when. They had a decade to prepare. They were still caught off guard. Now, as you see from this very simple graph, The average price of these retailers is about 18 to 20% higher than Amazon Fresh. And at the same time, we've already seen in a very short time period, Amazon has already started to take share from companies that have been around in the UK for over 100 years, okay? I don't know how many of you use this awesome app called Slack. Slack is completely changing the way that we communicate. It's removing the need for email. It's an app that I've got on my phone, on my iPad, on my MacBook, and it's world-class team collaboration software for the new enterprise, the new virtual enterprise, right? The new way that we work today. I've got people that work for me in Argentina, in Tel Aviv, Israel, in Boston, in San Francisco, all around the world, right? Freelancers, and they become a part of this group that we set up on Slack. Stuart Butterfield was named the CEO of the year, and Slack was named the most innovative company by the Wall Street Journal this past year. Slack is changing the way that we communicate because we need to communicate differently because we work differently, okay? And as one example of a young innovator, April Underwood, 35 years old, is the VP of product for Slack, and she's helped them get 3 million active users, right? These are the kinds of roles that are open to people that will come, they will hone their business knowledge, they will spend time understanding what's happening in the innovation economy, and they will align themselves with companies like Slack and others to find really meaningful and fulfilling professional careers. IBM realized that it was moving way too slow, and so they've adopted a lot of the things we've talked about to create a new approach to serving their customers called Blue Mix. And the early results of those IBM customers that are working with their Blue Mix operation are stunning, right? So IBM had to get humble. They had to change everything about the way they work with their customers, and Blue Mix is an example of how they're trying to improve the customer experience. Another area ripe for disruption is to improve broken trust, okay? Both Anthony Tan and Huilin Tan, both, by the way, are Harvard Business School students. At least that's where they met. They're not related, but they're both from Malaysia. And they were very concerned about the trust in taxis in Malaysia, the fear of perhaps being kidnapped or being robbed. And so as a result of that, they had a joint vision to create a much safer taxi experience. And today, Grab Taxi has a market cap of $1.5 billion. They're operating in 30 countries around the world. And they're one of the 4 leading on-demand car services, along with Didi, Uber, and Ola in India today. Okay, again, 2 young innovators who are changing the way that we think about transportation. Okay, another area ripe for disruption are redundant intermediaries. One of the great success stories is this company called the Dollar Shave Club. It was started with a $4,500 YouTube video that had 22 million views. Their market was to eliminate going through retail and sell shaving equipment, shaving gear, razors, and blades directly to male consumers. They recently sold the company to Unilever. This was announced over the summer for over $1 billion, okay, with very limited invested capital. And as a result of that, everyone from Procter & Gamble to Unilever are imitating their model to go direct to consumers to have more control and to control pricing, okay? Another area of disruption or ripe for disruption is the ability to provide more access than has been available to the marketplace. Some of you may know Etsy. Etsy is a global community providing craftspeople from all around the world to sell through their platform and to train them in how to be better business people, okay? So the torchbearers understand that failure is okay because we fail toward success. They understand that everything is a prototype. We're constantly getting feedback and evolving and maturing and improving our idea. Nothing is static, okay? The challenge that so many of these large companies face is they are victims of their own success. They need to balance the strength of what they know, what they're comfortable with the force of the future. One of the models created by a couple of former McKinsey colleagues is called the 3 horizons of growth. And we're starting to see more and more of these companies, these large companies on the risk of extinction, recognizing this. So as an example, General Electric just moved their corporate headquarters to Boston this week. GE is the proud company that was responsible with the intellectual property of Thomas Edison, the greatest inventor in at least American history, of commercializing the electric light bulb. GE reinvents itself constantly. That was a tradition that was built in from the time of Jack Welch. They are using very sophisticated lean startup methodologies to run the company today. Kyle Vogt, 31 years old, has created 2 companies. The first one was the company that became Twitch. Many of you gamers know Twitch. Amazon spent $1 billion to acquire Twitch, and now he's the CEO of Cruise Automation. Recently, General Motors acquired his second company for $1 billion, and this is what's going to allow General Motors to compete in the driverless car future that is awaiting all of us, okay? So GM finally understands that they can no longer be myopic and just think about what's happening in the world around them, which is Detroit. And they're finally taking steps to control their future, to control their destiny, okay? Caterpillar, another big old world company. They're a 100-year-old company. They make bulldozers, okay? And Morgan Vaughter, 35 years old, runs a 250-person team. She is there to completely transform Caterpillar's business model through a data-driven, customer-first model, right? Again, another example of a young woman who has massive responsibility and is really making a big difference in the way that Caterpillar interacts with their customers. Some of you who know SAP, the second largest software company in the world, Thomas Sauersieg is a 31-year-old chief information officer. He's the youngest CIO in the history of the Fortune 500. And these, again, are the kinds of roles that are available to those of you who are willing to put the time in to understand the trends that we're talking about. I don't know how many of you know what a hackathon is or have participated, but I would recommend you become familiar, and you do try out. I lead a lot of hackathons. One way that many great companies are solving problems and finding new recruits is by sponsoring hackathons. Salesforce.com ran a weekend hackathon where they gave away a $1 million grand prize to a team of 4 people that are focused on a challenge that Salesforce.com could not address internally, okay? Coming out of Australia, another extraordinarily successful company called Atlassian. Both Mike and Scott are 35, 36-year-old guys that have become the 3rd largest company in Australia. They just recently went public on the NASDAQ, and their entire company is built on the notion of hackathons and open innovation. One of the great cultures, very, very sophisticated approach to engaging and empowering their employees. Those of you who know Metro, the large retail store in Germany, they are partnering with Tech Stars to bring in entrepreneurs to increase the sense of urgency, increase the speed in which they innovate. Okay, they brought in people from Germany, from the States, from France, from Austria, from Hungary. And all of these companies are companies that they've made small investments in and that are going to help them realize the future. Barclays Bank, also working with a startup accelerator called Tech Stars, bringing a lot of new innovation like blockchain into their business unit. Virgin Media, working with Tech Stars, the world's largest startup accelerator, in order to advance their business. And then finally, something that I think is an important thing for all of you to know is even if you were to go get your MBA or your master's at Hult, that is not the end. It's just a step along the path. We are all lifelong learners. I have done 8 venture capital startups in my career. I've worked at McKinsey. I'm a professor. I still take classes all the time. I still read all the time. You can't be relevant and effective if you don't. So you've got to be a lifelong learner. So this great quote by Seneca, No man or woman was ever wise by chance. There's a new platform out there from a company called Everwise. It's a peer-to-peer mentoring platform, okay? And it's being embraced by some of the most sophisticated players in Silicon Valley. I love the strip on the right. What if we train our best employees and they leave? And the response is, well, what if we don't train them? What if we don't empower them and they stay? Okay? And so you've got 3 players in this ecosystem: a protege, a mentor, and the company. The company will continue to provide developmental support, but they're bringing in very perfectly selected mentors to help grow the skills of the protege, okay? And this is exactly what I want to leave you with, right? Only you can control your destiny. And the only way you're going to control your destiny is to self-educate constantly and to identify those organizations, those platforms that are going to allow you to be on the disrupting side as opposed to the disrupted side of the business. So, Erico, I'm going to pause for questions, okay?
Okay, Professor, thank you so much for showing us so many examples about one of the top topics that are discussed today. I was personally, interested in the ones that I knew before, but also the ones that I didn't know. So it was very, very interesting to see those examples. We do have some questions. Thank you so much for the questions that you guys have asked. The first question was, in regards to the Samsung recall that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, do you think that Samsung is doing a great thing?
Well, it's a very unusual decision. And so on the one hand, we've seen so many companies, whether it be Takata in airbags or Toyota in General Motors with their faulty automobiles that were causing great harm and death to some people. There's no question that Samsung had to do the recall. What I find so remarkable is they're taking one of their flagship products that accounts for 1/3 of their business, a product that was going to allow them to kind of regain their momentum, and they're completely giving up on that. So it's one thing to take responsibility for, your product failures, and on that level, yes, they're doing a great thing. What I find rather shocking is they're completely admitting defeat. They're not going back to the drawing board. They're just saying, we're going to get out of this business. And I just personally am still trying to understand why they've made that decision, right? They only announced this yesterday, that they were getting out of the business. It's going to have huge implications for who they are when they evolve in the future.
Okay. The next question is from Alex. I have a question regarding collaboration of big companies. Should they work together in order to find new disruptive technologies? I mean, collaboration of completely different industries, for example.
Absolutely, right? So the old adage was not invented here, and most companies thought any idea that was invented outside the 4 walls of their company was nowhere near as good as anything that they had invented. The notion of open innovation has taken hold, right? And we're seeing collaboration, right? And when you go and look at the IBM study on innovation, you look at the companies that are considered what we talked about as the torchbearers. They are intensively collaborative. So it doesn't mean just collaborate with any one type of company. They collaborate with venture capitalists to see where the future is going. They do co-design with their customers. They collaborate with universities to do research. Many of them do what I just showed. They do hackathons, right? So this weekend I led, as I've also taught at MIT for many, many years, I led a hackathon on augmented and virtual reality at MIT. And Sony was there, Samsung was there, Microsoft was there, right? To benefit from the innovation that was being created in that room. We had 350 participants from all over the world coding virtual reality and augmented reality apps. And so that's another way to collaborate. And then I talked about how Metro and Barclays and Virgin Media are partnering with Tech Stars, and they're bringing in entrepreneurs into an ecosystem, an accelerator, and they're working with them. They're seeing what their innovations are. They're investing in their startups. I'll give you another example. As a Hult professor, as the chief marketing and strategy officer of a startup, I had 35 of my Hult students working for me as interns this summer, 35. And many of them worked on very significant campaigns. We ran several hackathons for our students. We took their input very seriously. So the word collaboration is absolutely essential, but it's not just with other big companies, it's with the world. You've got to be completely open to getting the best ideas from wherever you can find them.
Okay. Another question that we have here, what would you advise as the way forward on disruptive innovation in Africa, considering that the continent is backward technologically at the moment?
It's a great question. We have, as you can imagine, a lot of students from Africa at Hult. I've gotten to know a gentleman by the name of Bosun Tinjani, who runs the Co-Creation Hub in Lagos, Nigeria. Mark Zuckerberg was out to visit him and his team recently. As we talk about in my classes, right, none of this is possible top down, right? Governments cannot mandate innovation. It's just not possible. We need young, ambitious Africans like Bosun, like many of my Hult students and alumni. Charles O.J., a student of mine who studied social entrepreneurship with me in San Francisco, who went back to work for Samsung in sub-Saharan Africa. These are the next generation of leaders that have studied, have seen the best of what the world has to offer, have learned about best practices from Silicon Valley and Boston and London, and are bringing these ideas and methodologies back with them. So Bosun, as one example, who was named a Google Explorer, Bosun has created an accelerator in Lagos. He's got about 35 startups that they are incubating, accelerating within this organization, and they are having real impact. So the best thing that you can do is you can become a magnet for other people, right? What I love about my African students, they care so much about going back to their countries and improving the way that everyone works and lives. And I take great pride in connecting these students when I meet them on our different campuses because I see their shared values. So become a part of a community of African students that wants to improve the future, and follow the model of the Co-Creation Lab in Lagos by Bosun Tinjani and team. I think it's a great model to replicate across all of Africa.
Okay, we have a couple of more questions. We will answer perhaps two more.
Yep.
The question from Japrit is, why software is eating the world? Isn't it helping us to achieving the great?
Yeah, no, that's not a negative. In no way is software eating the world negative. The message is that the skills required to be competitive are completely changed, right? To be a company, see, as an example, right? I have many Hult students that want to start their own companies, but they don't have software development skills, right? And so one of the many things I try to do is I try to connect my Hult students with my MIT students who write code. So many companies do not have the skills to write software. And as a result of that, they fall behind. So for example, when I spend time in Denmark, you have a lot of old line industrial manufacturers. They make everything from pumps and pressure sensors and things like that. They're trying to compete with Silicon Valley companies that have the ability to write software in their DNA. And they can't possibly do that. So the key is you've got to be able to tap in, right? So General Electric is a great example. General Electric has gone into Silicon Valley. This is an old line, 100-year-old company. They set up the GE digital operation, and they are now successfully competing with Facebook and Google and others for software talent. And they're running an advertising campaign on TV, a very humorous advertising campaign where they poke fun at themselves. But the message is, if you come to GE as a great software developer, you're going to work on some really cool projects. So the message is there's a big gap between the number of software jobs needed to be filled and the number of people with skills. And so we're seeing a whole new approach, this notion of these immersive coding academies, where people go through these 9 to 12 week boot camps. They work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. They learn how to code. And when they're done, they go get great jobs. But there's a huge skill gap right now that exists. And that's really the issue.
The last question is, what advice do you have to us that are just starting our careers for how to keep learning and continue to grow and reinvent ourselves over time?
I would say you need to attend conferences, right? First of all, you need to know how you want to contribute in this world, right? What your life's work will be. Do you want to participate in the healthcare industry, in the financial services industry? Do you want to be in the technology industry, right? Where do you want to participate? Where do you want to contribute? And then you need to go get very, very smart and very connected in that domain. That means reading voraciously in the Financial Times or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or whatever great, daily business publications there are. It means going to conferences and TED Talks and hearing the leaders of that industry speak about the future. It means reading blogs about the thought leaders that are shaping the future of that industry sector. It means going back for courses, and that could be courses like going back for a master's or an MBA at Hult. It could be taking some online courses through what they call a MOOC, or a massive open online platform like Coursera or MITx or HarvardX. All of the above, right? I mean, I'm at a point in my career where I've done this for 25 years and I do all of those things because there's no substitute for it. It's not how good or smart you are, it's how much you want it. And the way that you show how you want it and prove to others that you want it is to be very current and very relevant.
Okay, thank you, Professor. We had a large audience today and there's many, many questions. What we can do, we can share the questions with you, Professor, and after we receive the answers, we will reply to you with the answers of the questions that you asked. You will receive an email with the recording of this session, so you can watch it again if you want on your free time. But today I wanted to say thank you to everybody who tuned in today from all around the world, and a special thank you to you, Professor Grandinetti, for your time and information today.
Thank you, Erico, and I hope to see some of you on our many wonderful campuses around the world next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.